His phone vibrated on the marble counter, shattering the silence of the Tuesday morning, and when I glanced down, the contact photo that flashed across the locked screen was undeniably my neighbor, Sarah. The air in my lungs turned instantly to cement. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. All I could see was her face, her bright smile, the exact shade of lipstick I had complimented her on just last week, glowing against the dark glass. It wasn't a text message preview. It was a full-screen notification from a popular encrypted messaging app, the kind people use when they need discretion. My name is Clara, and until that precise second, I believed I had the perfect life. David and I had been married for 15 years. 15 years of shared mortgages, late-night talks, and the quiet, solid understanding that comes from building an entire world together. He was a consultant, which meant frequent travel, a necessary evil of his successful career. He was supposed to be halfway to Chicago right now, finalizing a major contract. The reason his phone was resting innocently on the counter was pure, stupid luck. He had rushed out the door, briefcase in hand, yelling a quick goodbye, and forgetting the device that tethered him to his illicit life. I stood there, staring at Sarah's picture, the realization dawning with a cold, sickening clarity. Sarah, who always borrowed my sugar. Sarah, whose children played with ours. Sarah, who lived 50 feet across the street. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a grotesque violation of my comfort, my home, my entire neighborhood ecosystem. Yet, a picture on a forgotten phone wasn't enough for the decisive action I knew I was about to take. I needed proof that was physical, undeniable, and impossible to talk his way out of. David had left in such a hurry that he'd forgotten his favorite winter coat, the charcoal wool one he always took on business trips. With shaking hands, I walked toward the mudroom closet. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe just a distraction from the burning acid in my stomach. But my fingers instinctively went to the inner breast pocket, the one he always used for small, important things. That's where I felt it. The crisp, familiar stiffness of a folded receipt folio. It wasn't a dry cleaning ticket or a gas slip. It was a proper hotel folio, thick and detailed. I pulled it out, unfolded it, and watched my world dissolve in a font I recognized instantly. The dates spanned the previous weekend, a time David had explicitly told me he was working late in the office, too swamped to even text. The location wasn't an anonymous motel by the highway. It was the luxurious Fairmont Grand, right here in the city center, only 20 minutes from our house. And there, listed under the room charge, was the final devastating detail. Executive honeymoon suite. 2 nights. Paid in full. The breath I'd been holding finally escaped in a soundless, ragged gasp. The phone provided the suspect, but the receipt provided the crime scene, the motive, and the expense report. It confirmed that he hadn't just slipped up. He had planned an elaborate, luxurious escape. They hadn't settled for a cheap thrill. They had luxuriated in a bespoke suite designed for intimacy and celebration. My tears didn't fall. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over me, a clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to confront him by throwing the coat in his face. That would be messy, emotional, and give him room to lie. I needed to perform an act of pure, calculated revenge that would leave him speechless and guarantee my emotional freedom. I needed to witness the crime scene myself. I picked up the phone, not David's, but mine. I called the Fairmont Grand. Using the receipt for reference, I spoke to the concierge. "I'd like to book the executive honeymoon suite," I said, my voice eerily steady. "Suite number 703, specifically. I see it was recently occupied. I hope it's available for this coming Friday." The receptionist, oblivious to the tragedy she was enabling, confirmed the reservation. I provided David's primary credit card, the joint account we had shared for years, and booked the exact same room for myself, alone. Friday arrived, dragging its feet like a condemned man. I drove to the Fairmont, checked in under my maiden name, Clara Davies, and took the elevator up to the 7th floor. The sheer opulence of the hallway felt like a personal insult. When I finally pushed open the heavy oak door of Suite 703, the scent of expensive sandalwood and fresh linen hit me. It was exactly what you would expect. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, a jacuzzi tub big enough for two, and a massive king-sized bed dominating the center of the Kiao room. This wasn't just a place they slept. This was where they shared secrets, where they laughed at my expense, where they planned future rendezvous. I walked straight to the balcony, the place where they had probably stood, sipping champagne and watching the lights twinkle. Lights that shone over the very house where I was sitting, waiting for my traveling husband to call. The pain was overwhelming, but it was productive. It wasn't the pain of rejection. It was the searing pain of knowing I had wasted 15 years on a lie. I didn't touch anything. I didn't sit down. I simply walked over to the desk, pulled out a sheet of the elegant Fairmont stationery, and wrote 2 brief, devastating sentences. I folded the paper precisely and placed it, along with the original hotel receipt David had so carelessly left behind, centered on the pristine white pillow of the honeymoon suite bed. The note read, "I hope you truly enjoyed the executive honeymoon. Sweet David, you won't need to book another one for us." I checked out immediately, drove home, and performed the final acts of severance. I packed David's belongings into boxes and left them on the front porch. I changed the security codes and the locks on every door. I didn't answer his frantic calls when he realized he was locked out of his own life. The silence I imposed was the loudest message he had ever received. He had chosen to turn our home into a hotel suite for his affair. I merely formalized the transaction. I learned that day that true strength isn't found in explosive confrontation, but in cold, surgical precision. The greatest revenge is not lowering yourself to their level, but raising yourself out of their reach entirely. Never ignore the quiet signals, the misplaced objects, the forgotten receipts. If you have to become a detective in your own marriage, the case is already closed. If you've experienced the devastation of finding proof of infidelity and the terrifying moment you realized you had to act, please share your story in the comments. We must remind each other that finding the truth, however painful, is the first step toward freedom. The quiet signals I had been ignoring weren't just misplaced objects or forgotten receipts. They were fault lines running straight through the foundation of my reality. The initial unease, the slight uptick in his client meetings, the sudden, fierce protectiveness over his phone, had curdled into a heavy, sickening dread that weighed on my chest every time he walked through the door. I tried to reason it away. He's stressed at work. I'm being paranoid. We've been married for 10 years. I know this man. But the man I knew wouldn't wake up at 3 a.m. to check messages, wouldn't suddenly start showering immediately after coming home from a supposed long drive, and certainly wouldn't forget our anniversary for the first time since we met. The internal battle was exhausting. Half of me was the wife who cherished the life we built, the house, the dogs, the shared history, desperate to believe that this was just a phase, a male midlife crisis, anything but betrayal. The other half was a cold forensic detective, meticulously documenting every deviation from the norm. It was a terrifying transformation, turning the woman who loved him into the enemy who sought his ruin. I started sleeping less, my mind constantly running scenarios, reviewing timelines, calculating the exact moment the shift had begun. Was it 6 months ago, when he got that promotion? Was it a year ago, when we stopped talking over dinner and started scrolling through separate screens? My investigation began subtly. I started monitoring the shared credit card statements. Nothing overtly suspicious, No jewelry purchases, no lavish trips. But there were numerous small charges. Gas fills far from his usual, routes, coffee runs near an unfamiliar part of the city, and a recurring charge from a prepaid cell service provider that I couldn't account for. When I asked him about the gas charges, he'd snap, "I had to take a detour. The highway was closed." "Why are you grilling me about every tank of gas, Sarah? Do you not trust me?" And just like that, the suspicion was turned back onto me, making me feel guilty for asking a rational question. That was the gaslighting, subtle yet effective, reinforcing the silence. I knew the phone was the key, the digital fortress where the truth was locked away. He never left it unattended, not even to go to the bathroom. He had changed his passcode to a complicated alphanumeric sequence that I couldn't guess. My opportunity finally came on a Tuesday night. He had worked late, claiming exhaustion, and fell asleep almost instantly on the sofa, the phone resting face down on the end table, plugged into the charger. My heart hammered against my ribs, a brutal, physical reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just checking his messages. This was risking the nuclear destruction of my marriage, perhaps finding something I could never unsee. I waited until his breathing deepened into a heavy, rhythmic snore. Slowly, agonizingly, I reached for the device. My fingers trembled so violently I almost dropped it. The screen lit up, demanding the passcode. I felt a wave of icy despair. I was beaten before. I started. Then, I remembered a tiny detail from 2 weeks ago. He had been typing the code while watching a football game, and in a moment of distraction, I saw his thumb movements. It wasn't random. It corresponded to the jersey number of his favorite player, followed by a sequence of letters I recognized as his mother's birth year. I typed the sequence. 1 agonizing second. The lock clicked open. The immediate screen was clean, just the standard apps and wallpapers. He was smart. Too smart. I knew he wasn't using the native messaging app for anything illicit. I started scrolling through his apps, my eyes darting, searching for anything unfamiliar. I found it tucked away in a folder labeled Utilities, a discrete gray icon for a lesser-known secure messaging platform, one that allowed for auto-deleting chats. My hands were shaking so much I could barely tap the icon. The app opened, and there, pinned to the top of the chat list, was a contact. Named simply J. No profile picture, just the letter. I clicked the thread. The messages were recent, dating back only 2 weeks, but they were devastatingly clear. "Are you free Friday? I miss your touch. My wife is suspicious. We need to be careful. Tell your driver I'll meet you at the usual spot." The usual spot. That phrase hit me like a physical blow. The coffee runs, the detours, the prepaid phone charges, it all snapped into focus. Then, scrolling slightly further, I saw the message that defined the cruelty, the one that ended all possible reconciliation. It was sent just hours earlier, while he was supposedly stuck in traffic. "I love you. She will never know." I froze, the phone heavy in my hand, the harsh blue light illuminating the tears that finally started to stream down my face. The pain was so sharp, it felt like my internal organs were bruising. It wasn't the proof of infidelity that hurt the most. It was the casual, effortless lie embedded in those 3 words. She will never know. But I did know. And now, armed with absolute certainty, the fear vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't the wife anymore. I was the detective who had cracked the case. He stirred slightly on the sofa, a low groan escaping his lips. I had seconds. I took 3 quick, high-resolution screenshots of the damning thread, immediately transferring them to a cloud storage folder I had set up weeks ago, just in case. Then, I deleted the screenshots from his phone's gallery and placed the phone back on the end table, exactly where it had been. I retreated to the bedroom, not making a sound, not wiping the tears. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise and for him to wake up. The final, explosive revelation that the flash forward hinted at, the moment of confrontation, was coming. But before I screamed, before I packed a single bag, I needed to solidify my escape plan. I had the truth, and the truth, though devastatingly heavy, was the only currency that mattered now. I realized that my task wasn't just to expose him. It was to use the pain he inflicted as fuel to save myself. I had found the evidence, and now I would begin the process of finding freedom. The evidence was a scorching weight in my palm, not physical fire, but a digital inferno of text messages, financial transfers, and a calendar marked with appointments that did not belong to our shared life. The phone, a burner device he thought he'd hidden perfectly inside a hollowed-out paperback copy of The Great Gatsby, was the key to the vault, and now the vault was wide open, exposing the barren, ugly landscape of his double life. I didn't cry. The tears had evaporated in the white-hot heat of pure, surgical focus. I had to live with him for 2 more days. 2 days of excruciating silence where every shared meal, every casual touch, every "How was your day, darling?" felt like a fresh layer of corrosive acid on my soul. My task was to perform the role of the happily oblivious wife, a role I had played convincingly for 5 years without realizing it was ever a role. Now, the performance was critical. One slip, one flicker of genuine revulsion in my eyes, and I knew I would lose the tactical advantage. He was cunning, precise and paranoid enough to turn dangerous if cornered. My investigation deepened into a covert military operation. I wasn't just looking at the betrayal. I was dissecting the structure of the lie. Late at night, huddled under the heavy duvet in the spare room, claiming a migraine when he tried to join me, I worked. I used a specialized USB duplicator I'd ordered anonymously weeks ago, mirroring the entire contents of the burner phone onto 3 encrypted drives. One was sealed in a safety deposit box 10 miles away. Another was taped beneath the cistern of the bathroom toilet. The third, the working copy, stayed tethered to my laptop. The financial data was the most shocking. It wasn't just an affair, it was an entire parallel economy. Offshore accounts, sizable monthly transfers to an address I didn't recognize, a small town 2 states away, and large withdrawals disguised as business operating expenses. My gut clenched tighter than a fist. This wasn't infidelity. This was financial treason. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was bleeding our future dry, building a fortress for someone else using bricks purchased with my hard-earned trust. The doubt that had begun as a tiny splinter of suspicion had grown into a massive, jagged shard, tearing at everything I thought was solid. I remembered the odd comments about his business trips, the way his eyes would momentarily glaze over when I asked mundane questions about his days, the sudden, irrational irritability if I touched his briefcase. All the small, innocuous signals that my brain had categorized as stress or work pressure now rearranged themselves into a terrifying crystalline pattern of deceit. He hadn't been stressed. He had been managing 2 complete, mutually exclusive realities. One evening, he sat across from me at the dinner table, recounting a fabricated story about a difficult client meeting. His voice was smooth, his hands gesturing casually. I watched him, truly watched him, and saw a stranger. His smile was a practiced veneer. I realized that for years, I had been in love with a carefully crafted avatar, not a man. The sheer magnitude of the fabrication was dizzying. How do you share a bed with a ghost? How do you live in a house that is essentially a stage set? That night, I moved to the final stage of my preparation. While he snored soundly, a deep, familiar sound that now sounded like a mocking rumble, I accessed the documents I had meticulously collected over the last month. My passport, my birth certificate, critical joint account statements, copied before he could empty them, and the deeds to the property, which thankfully were jointly owned and protected by pre-nuptial clauses he had foolishly assumed were ironclad. I packed a single small duffel bag, lining the bottom with the printed screenshots of the damning texts and the ledger of the secret transactions. I looked at the wedding photograph on the bedside table. 2 smiling, naive faces, promising forever. I picked it up, expecting to feel sadness or anger, but felt only emptiness. The anger had been channeled, replaced by cold, strategic clarity. I wasn't just leaving, I was extracting myself. The planned confrontation was scheduled for the next morning. I had chosen 8 a.m., precisely when he would be having his second cup of coffee, right before he left for his supposed office. It was a time of routine, a time when he would feel safest, making his shock and subsequent reaction more predictable. But life, as always, decided to intercede. At 6:30 a.m., I heard the faint ping of his personal phone, the one he left on the charging pad beside our bed, the one he considered safe because it only contained work contacts and family photos. A notification popped up on the screen, illuminating the dark room. It wasn't a text, it was an email. The subject line, bold and unforgiving, screamed at me. Final notice, escrow payment overdue for 1422 Willow Creek Lawn. My breath hitched. 1422 Willow Creek Lawn. That was the address in the transaction ledgers I had analyzed the night before. The place 2 states away. Escrow payment. He wasn't renting a safe house or hiding cash. He was buying a new home. He hadn't just been preparing to leave me. He had completed the transaction. The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. He was ready to walk out the door and start his new life, leaving me with the wreckage. I snatched the phone, my fingers trembling violently. I scrolled through the email chain, my eyes devouring the details of closing dates, mortgage documents, and the name of the recipient of the final wire transfer. It wasn't a business name. It was a woman's name. A name I now knew intimately from the messages on the burner phone. Eleanor. The realization detonated within me. He wasn't planning the departure. He was living the departure. The stage wasn't just set. The curtain was about to drop, and I was scheduled to be the one left standing in the dark. The time for controlled confrontation was over. This was a preemptive strike. I dropped his phone back onto the charging pad, the soft thud sounding deafening in the early morning quiet. My entire body surged with adrenaline, overriding the paralyzing fear. I walked to the bedroom closet, pulled out the duffel bag, and slung it over my shoulder. I didn't need to wait for 8 a.m. I didn't need his explanation. I had everything I needed to disappear and rebuild. As I reached the front door, my hand on the cold brass knob, I paused. I couldn't leave without one final loud statement. Not for him, but for myself. To reclaim the voice he had silenced with his years of deceit. I turned back towards the master bedroom, took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of our fractured marriage. And then I screamed. Not a shriek of terror, but a raw, visceral sound of pure, liberated rage aimed directly at the man sleeping soundly, dreaming of his new life. "It's over," I roared, the sound echoing through the perfect silent house. He bolted upright, his eyes wide and disoriented in the dim light. Before he could process the noise, before he could form a lie or ask what was wrong, I was already outside, the key to the rental car already turning in the ignition. I didn't look back. The truth had set me free. But first, it had required me to find the courage to burn the entire world down. I drove until the familiar streets dissolved into anonymous highway miles, the sun finally rising behind me, symbolizing the dawn of a life finally free of performance and deceit. That scream, that single, explosive moment, was the only closure I needed. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of suspicion, the terrifying confirmation of betrayal, and the desperate need for escape, then you know this feeling, the agonizing, necessary break. Don't wait for the final notice. Trust the knot in your gut. And when you finally find the evidence, use it not as a weapon, but as a map to your own freedom. It's the only way to truly save yourself. The agony was not in the truth itself, but in the long, drawn-out suffocation of the suspicion that preceded it. Before the scream, before the blessed, terrifying clarity, there was only David and me, living inside a meticulously crafted lie that felt entirely real. We had built a life based on shared ambition, quiet evenings, and the kind of easy laughter that signaled deep, unwavering security. My name is Eleanor, and for 6 years, I believed I had found my safe harbor in David. The shift, when it came, was so subtle, it felt like a draft escaping a window I couldn't locate. It started not with an argument or a late night, but with his phone. David had always been casual with technology. His laptop was often left open, his phone resting face up on the counter. We knew each other's passwords, not out of necessity, but convenience. Then, the gradual change. The phone started migrating. From the counter to his pocket, from the nightstand to the floor beside the bed, face down. He developed a sudden habit of silencing notifications the moment they arrived, a quick, practiced movement of his thumb. When I asked him what was new with work, his answers became shorter, boilerplate summaries that lacked the enthusiastic detail he used to share. He was present, but entirely sealed off. The doubt burrowed into me like a parasite, feeding on sleep and serenity. I tried to dismiss it as stress, a new project, or even my own insecurity resurfacing. I fought the urge to snoop, knowing that once that line was crossed, there was no going back. If I found nothing, I would have ruined the trust through my own paranoia. If I found something, I would have ruined my life. It was a terrifying stalemate, and the silence of our apartment became heavy, pressing. The signs, however, kept accumulating, too illogical to ignore. The faint, sweet scent of a perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his jacket collar one Thursday morning. Not strong enough to be definitive, just enough to catch my throat. A gym bag that was perpetually packed, yet never seemed to be unpacked. The clothes inside, always smelling faintly of detergent, but never the heavy musk of a real workout. And then there was the mileage. We shared a single car. I started taking mental notes of the odometer before he left for what he called late meetings downtown, comparing it to the reading when he returned. The differences were marginal, often under 10 miles, but they never matched the logical distance to the office and back. He was taking detours, short, contained trips that required privacy, not speed. The investigation became my secret life, a relentless, silent campaign waged while David slept peacefully beside me. I became a master of observation, a silent detective in my own home. I learned the patterns of his breathing, the precise time he would fall into deep sleep, the exact angle at which his wrist would rest, allowing me a glimpse of his watch. I started leaving subtle, almost imperceptible markers. A book moved a fraction of an inch on his desk. A specific coffee mug placed just so. When I returned and the book was centered or the mug was gone, I knew he had spent time there, time he hadn't accounted for. My breakthrough came not through the phone, which was impenetrable, but through a forgotten piece of history, an old tablet we bought together during a weekend trip 3 years ago. It had been sitting in a drawer, dead and dusty, replaced by newer models. David hadn't used it in ages, but he had never fully reset it. One rainy Tuesday, while he was supposedly at a seminar, I plugged it in. It sputtered to life, connecting automatically to our home Wi-Fi. I navigated the interface with shaking hands. The tablet still held a trove of old photos and shared documents, but I ignored those. I went straight to the cloud backups and the synced message logs. David, having used this tablet briefly on a business trip 6 months prior, had forgotten to disable the syncing for a specific, encrypted messaging app he now used on his current phone. The first few messages I scrolled through were innocuous, then professional, then suddenly, devastatingly intimate. They weren't just flirting. They were transcripts of an alternate reality. Years of secret meetings, whispered promises, future plans. The timeline wasn't recent. It stretched back nearly 2 years. A constant, parallel relationship running smoothly beneath the foundation of our marriage. The physical, evidence, the scent, the mileage, the quick thumb movements, all clicked into place, forming a horrifyingly clear picture. The crucial detail, the final drop of poison, was a set of photos. They weren't explicit, but they were deeply personal. A photograph of David and the woman, a colleague whose name I recognized from casual office chatter, standing outside a small, cozy cabin in the mountains, a place he told me he had visited alone for a mandatory company retreat last winter. They were holding hands, smiling the genuine, relaxed smiles that we hadn't shared in a very long time. Below the photo was a message, time-stamped less than 48 hours earlier. Counting the minutes until Saturday. Can't wait to hear Eleanor's excuse for being busy this time. That sentence, the cruel, dismissive arrogance of it, hit me with a physical force that eclipsed the betrayal itself. He wasn't just cheating. He was calculating, anticipating my movements, mocking me to his lover. I didn't call him. I didn't cry. I didn't even slam the tablet down. I stood up slowly, the screen still glowing with their shared happiness, and the room tilted slightly. The heavy tension I had carried for months, the doubt, the fear, the relentless questioning, vanished. It was replaced by a cold, searing calm. The investigation was over. The verdict was in. My immediate action wasn't confrontation. It was survival. The David I thought I knew was, gone, replaced by a stranger who had meticulously lied to me for 2 years. I had to disappear before he had a chance to spin the narrative, before his performance could resume. I started packing. Not clothes, but documents. Passports, bank statements, birth certificates. Only essentials. Things that couldn't be replaced. I moved with the stealth and focus of a soldier behind enemy lines, knowing I had a window of maybe 4 hours before he returned. When he finally walked through the door later that evening, I was ready. I was not the hysterical wife he might have expected. I was wearing a coat, my small pre-packed duffel bag was by the door, and the tablet, fully charged, was sitting prominently on the kitchen island, open to the cabin photo and that vile, calculating message. He saw the tablet, then he saw the bag, and the blood drained from his face. The casual smile he'd worn just moments before evaporated. He started to speak, a practiced defense already forming on his lips. But I cut him off, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Don't. Just stop. I know everything. That was the moment. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my own breath. His eyes darted from the screen to the bag, searching desperately for an escape route in the truth he could no longer deny. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me with a sickening mix of panic and calculation. It was pure, unadulterated fear. The fear of a man whose comfortable world had just been dismantled. The scream, the one I mentioned at the beginning, wasn't his. It was mine. A sudden, primal sound that tore from my chest. An expulsion of every lie, every doubt, and every wasted minute. It wasn't a scream of pain, but a scream of finality. It was the sound of the door slamming shut on the past, freeing me from the crushing weight of suspicion and confirming the agonizing, necessary break. I walked out then, leaving him standing there in the wreckage of our kitchen, frozen by his own discovery. The car, the house, the shared accounts. They were all secondary. I had found the evidence, not as a weapon to destroy him, but as the only map that led to my own freedom. I didn't save the marriage. I saved myself. If you are reading this, clinging to the edge of doubt, smelling the unfamiliar perfume, or tracking the phantom mileage on a car, stop waiting for the final. Catastrophic notice. Trust the nod in your gut, because that small, persistent voice is the only GPS you need. It's telling you the truth, whispering the name of the exit ramp you need to take to truly save yourself. Don't waste another moment trying to fix a foundation that was never real. Take the map, take the exit, and start building anew. It's the only way to breathe freely again. But before I took that exit ramp, before I had the clarity to recognize the truth staring me down, I needed proof. I needed the final, undeniable catastrophe to justify demolishing the life I had so meticulously built. The knot in my gut wasn't enough. My mind, traitorously loyal to the man I thought I knew, demanded receipts, timestamps, and photographs. That demand turned me into a ghost in my own house, a detective whose only case was the slow-motion destruction of her marriage. The investigation started small, rooted in the sensory overload of discrepancy. It began with the phantom mileage on his car, a detail so mundane it should have been laughable. He claimed the 30-mile round trip to his late-night meeting had been canceled, yet the odometer had advanced exactly that amount since he'd last parked it. Where did those miles go? Who drove them? I tried to rationalize it. A mistake in my reading, a forgotten errand. But the mathematical precision of the lie was suffocating. I started photographing the dashboard every morning, logging the numbers in a hidden spreadsheet, an exercise in forensic madness. Then came the scent. It was heavy, cheap, and sickeningly sweet. Totally unlike my own sophisticated blend of sandalwood and citrus. I found it clinging to the wool of his navy suit jacket after he claimed to have spent the afternoon reviewing blueprints in a sterile office. I pressed my face into the lapel, inhaling the strange, flowery aggression, and felt the sudden, icy certainty of betrayal bypass my rational brain entirely. It wasn't just that he was with someone else. It was that he was with someone who smelled like that, a detail that felt like a deliberate insult. He was choosing something coarse and obvious over the subtlety we had cultivated for years. I hung the jacket back up, my hands shaking, the evidence invisible but overwhelming. My routine shifted from loving partner to meticulous observer. Every time he picked up his phone, I tracked the angle of his body, the way his shoulders hunched inward, creating a physical shield against me. His laughter had become forced, his conversations clipped. He suddenly started locking his screen when he was in the next room, something he had never done. We used to leave our devices charging side by side, sharing passwords and playlists without a thought. Now, his phone was a fortress of new biometric scans and complex passcodes he typed out with his back turned. The irony was brutal. The very act of hiding confirmed what I was desperately trying to deny. The tension became a physical pressure in the air of our home. We moved through the space like two hostile satellites, constantly orbiting but never connecting. Our conversations were limited to logistics, bills, groceries, who was picking up the dry cleaning. The silence, once comfortable, now hummed with accusation. I stopped sleeping. I would lie awake, listening to the rhythmic, too steady breathing, beside me, consumed by the need to know. I wasn't searching for peace. I was hunting for the sharpest possible pain, the kind of finality that would force me to act. The opportunity finally arrived on a Thursday night. He had taken a sudden, frantic call claiming a major client crisis and rushed out, saying he'd be pulling an all-nighter at the office. This time, he was careless. He left his work laptop open on the desk, screen dimmed but not locked, a rarity for him. Lately. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. This was it. The moment I either found nothing and had to live with the paralyzing doubt forever, or found everything and destroyed my world. I tiptoed over, the thick carpet muffling my steps. The screen glowed softly, showing a spreadsheet titled Q3 Projections, boring and innocuous. But I knew better. No one leaves a laptop unlocked for projections. My fingers trembled as I navigated the files, searching for the telltale signs of evasion, hidden folders, encrypted documents, anything filed under deceptively normal names. For 30 minutes, I found nothing but work, the mundane reality taunting my paranoia. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was the crazy one. Just as the relief, cold and terrifying, began to wash over me, I noticed the barely visible icon in the lower taskbar. It looked like a generic cloud storage symbol, but it wasn't the Dropbox we usually used. I clicked it. It required a password. I tried his usual long-forgotten pet's name. Denied. I tried his mother's birthday. Denied. The clock on the laptop screen seemed to tick louder, counting down until his inevitable return. Then, a desperate, gut-wrenching thought struck me. I typed my own birthday, followed by the year we met. Access granted. The folder opened instantly, revealing not spreadsheets, but hundreds of files labeled only by dates. I clicked the most recent 1. Yesterday. It wasn't a document. It was a video. I hit play, muted the sound instinctively, and watched the life drain out of me in that glowing screen light. The clip was short, maybe 20 seconds. It showed a small, cheap hotel room, the kind with garish floral wallpaper, ironically mirroring the aggressive perfume I'd smelled. He was there, laughing, utterly relaxed, completely himself, but not with me. He was feeding strawberries to a woman whose face was illuminated by the cheap lamp, her hand resting intimately on his cheek. It was the same woman I had seen in his office parking lot once, introduced to me briefly as a junior sales associate. It wasn't the sex that broke me. It was the intimacy, the unguarded joy on his face, a look he hadn't directed toward me in months. It was the realization that the man beside me every night was a carefully constructed fiction, a puppet performing the role of my husband. That video wasn't just proof of infidelity. It was proof of a parallel life, a complete separate reality built on the ruins of ours. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My hands stopped shaking. The air went still, thick with the weight of absolute finality. I closed the laptop, leaving the screen exactly as I found it. I deleted the screenshot records from my phone, wiped the hidden spreadsheet, and walked upstairs. I didn't confront him. Confrontation was for couples who still had something to lose. I had just lost everything, and in that loss, I found a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. The small, persistent voice in my gut wasn't just whispering anymore. It was screaming the name of the exit ramp, and I finally knew exactly where I was going. My old life had just vaporized, leaving behind only the map for the journey ahead. If you are reading this, and you are logging phantom miles, smelling unknown scents, or trying endless passwords hoping to find the reassurance of an empty folder, stop. Stop waiting for the moment of proof, because the moment you start investigating is the moment the truth has already won. That agonizing search for evidence is merely the desperate delay before acknowledging the inevitable exit. Don't waste another breath trying to fix a foundation that was never solid. Take the map, take the exit, and start building anew. It is the only way you will ever truly breathe again. But how do you stop? How do you accept the exit when every fiber of your being screams for validation? I knew, intellectually, that the moment I started looking, I had already lost the war. But I needed to win the battle of certainty. I needed the concrete, crushing proof to silence the insidious voice of doubt that kept whispering, "You are paranoid. You are the problem. He loves you." That voice was fueled by years of shared history, the comfortable lie that had been our marriage. The doubts didn't arrive in a single tidal wave. They were insidious, like micro fissures appearing in concrete. It started with the small things, a sudden, almost aggressive interest in fitness after years of comfortable couch surfing. He bought a new brand of body wash, one with a sharp, woody scent that was completely unlike the clean citrus smell I associated with him. When I commented on it, he offered a breezy, "Just trying something new, babe." But the way his eyes darted away confirmed the shift was not for my benefit. Then there was the phone. It had always been casually accessible, lying face up on the counter. Now it was a biological extension of his hand, face always down, locked, and instantly pocketed if I entered the room. My own behavior became pathological. I was performing a role in a play I hadn't auditioned for, the happy, trusting wife. I cooked his favorite meals, I laughed at his tired work stories, and I made sure my breathing was even and slow in the early hours, pretending to be asleep while listening for the telltale tap-tap of a late-night text being carefully composed under the covers. The effort of maintaining the facade was physically exhausting. My skin felt too tight. My smile was a strain, and the knot in my stomach was a permanent, grinding fixture. Every day felt like I was holding my breath underwater, waiting for the oxygen to run out. The real investigation began the afternoon he left his laptop, open on the kitchen island. It wasn't a deliberate trap, just carelessness, or perhaps arrogance. I didn't check his emails immediately. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun. I was still operating in the realm of plausible deniability. I started with the calendar. Nothing obvious. Meetings, travel, golf. But I cross-referenced his supposed 3-day business trip to Austin with the hotel bill receipts I'd accidentally seen when I was sorting the mail. The dates matched, but the hotel was listed as being 5 miles outside the city center, a location I knew was inconvenient for the main conference venue he was attending. Why the distance? Why the unnecessary expense of taxis? The small details became my ammunition. I downloaded a free, inconspicuous app that checked the EXIF data on photos he uploaded to our shared cloud, ostensibly pictures of his golf game or the city view. I found that 3 recent photos, all taken on a Tuesday, when he claimed to be working late at the office, were tagged with geolocation data pointing to an upscale residential complex across town, a place he had absolutely no reason to be. My heart didn't pound. It froze. It was a cold, clinical horror, far worse than the explosive, messy betrayal I had been bracing for. I escalated. The phone remained the fortified fortress, but I remembered a tiny detail from months ago. His primary work computer used the same fingerprint access as his personal phone, but he occasionally used a backup password for administrative access. I spent 2 nights, hidden under the covers with my own phone's flashlight dim, typing out every combination of important dates. Anniversaries, birthdays, the day we moved in. Nothing. The frustration was a physical scream trapped in my throat. Then, I remembered the nickname he used for his late grandmother, a silly, obscure name only our family knew. It was a long shot, sentimental, and slightly absurd. On the 3rd night, the screen blinked. Welcome, his name. The sudden access was anticlimactic. There was no immediate, blazing banner headline screaming affair. It was hidden, buried deep, requiring effort, confirming that this wasn't a mistake. It was a careful, calculated construction of deception. I found the hidden folder on his desktop, named Q3 Reports, disguised by the standard icon. Inside, there were no spreadsheets. There were hundreds of encrypted messages and dozens of highly intimate recent photographs. The woman wasn't a colleague. She wasn't a mistake. She was beautiful, younger, and radiating a vibrancy that felt like a direct insult to my current state of exhaustion. But the pictures weren't the worst part. The worst part was the thread of emails beneath them, dated over the last 6 months. They weren't just declarations of love. They were blueprints. They discussed shared accounts, apartment, hunting near her mother, and, most damningly, a planned trip to an exotic location in 2 weeks. A trip he had explicitly told me was canceled due to budget cuts at work. The final email, dated yesterday, confirmed the severity of the planned exit. He was finalizing a lawyer consultation. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a life parallel to mine, systematically dismantling our foundation without giving me any notice. He was planning to leave me financially exposed and emotionally decimated, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the clean, surgical cut. I stepped back from the keyboard, the screen casting a cold blue glow across the room. There was no more uncertainty. The paralyzing fear was replaced by an almost terrifying clarity. My body was shaking, but my mind was utterly, brutally calm. This was not about fixing a relationship. This was about survival. The map to the exit was clearly laid out on that screen, printed in the cold fonts of deceit. The agonizing search was over. The truth had won. I looked at the digital calendar entry for the trip in 2 weeks and realized I wouldn't be waiting for his perfect timing. I stood up, walked into our master bathroom, and began packing a small bag. The air felt thin, but for the first time in months, I felt capable of inhaling it fully. The inevitable exit was terrifying, but the alternative, waiting for him to deliver the final blow, was unthinkable. My desperate delay was finished. I had the proof I needed, and now I just needed to secure my new beginning. I looked at the wedding photograph on the dresser, a testament to a beautiful, solid foundation that was never actually solid, and I felt nothing but the firm resolve to start building anew, one deliberate, painful step at a time. If you find yourself holding a piece of evidence that changes everything, don't let the fear of change make you cling to the wreckage. Take the map. Take the exit. You deserve to breathe again. Do not wait for permission. But before that resolution, before I held that certainty, there was only a slow, suffocating fog of doubt. It didn't arrive with a bang or a dramatically lipstick-stained collar. It seeped in, drop by insidious drop, until I couldn't see the edges of my reality anymore. We had built a life based on meticulous schedules and shared passwords, a fortress of predictability. And then, the mortar started, crumbling. It began innocently enough, with the subtle shift in Leo's routine. The urgent calls that forced him to work late, the sudden need for weekend solitude to catch up on quarterly reports. He was always career-driven, so at first I praised his diligence. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, stirring my tea one Tuesday evening, when the first real tremor hit. Leo had just walked in, apologizing profusely for missing dinner, smelling faintly of the expensive cologne I had bought him for Christmas. But underneath that familiar, warm scent, there was something else. A sharp, almost citrusy note that was entirely foreign to our home, clinging faintly to the collar of his tailored shirt. I dismissed it immediately. Maybe he'd been near a colleague. Maybe he'd brushed past someone in the elevator. But the scent lingered in my memory, a tiny, annoying static in the perfect symphony of our marriage. Over the next few weeks, the static intensified. He became strangely possessive of his phone, holding it face down, clearing his history with an almost mechanical precision. If I asked him to look up a restaurant while he was holding it, he'd visibly tense, quickly passing the task to me on the iPad. "Battery dying," he'd mumble, but the charge indicator was always green. The doubt became a physical weight, pressing down on my chest every time he smiled that too perfect, slightly vacant smile. I started questioning my own sanity. Was I projecting? Was I inventing scenarios because our comfortable routine had finally bored me? Leo was a master of normalcy. When he was home, he was fully present. He remembered our anniversary, complimented my cooking, and asked about my day with genuine interest. That's what made the invisible wound so agonizing. The betrayal felt surgically precise, leaving no exterior scar. The investigation phase began not with furious determination, but with paralyzing guilt. I was crossing a line I swore I never would. But the need to replace the paralyzing unknown with even a painful truth became overwhelming. My first attempt was small, almost pathetic. I started subtly tracking the mileage on his car. He claimed the business trip to Boston was 300 miles round trip. The odometer suggested 450. Where did the extra distance go? A detour? A meeting at a different branch? My mind offered countless, rational explanations, but my gut churned out one dark, simple answer. One afternoon, Leo left his wallet on the kitchen counter while taking a quick shower before a supposed evening client dinner. My heart hammered against my ribs, making my hands tremble. This was it, the point of no return. If I looked, I was committing to the devastation. If I didn't, I was agreeing to live in perpetual twilight. I slid open the leather flap. I wasn't looking for a picture or a damning text message. I was looking for financial anomalies. Tucked into a tiny inner compartment, far from his business receipts, I found two things that broke the carefully constructed facade. The first was a receipt from a high-end flower shop, dated 2 weeks prior. Not for roses, which he always bought me, but for lilies, my absolute least favorite flower. The second, and far more critical piece of evidence was a key fob. It wasn't our house key, nor his office key, nor the gym key. It was a generic plastic square, the kind used for entry into modern apartment buildings or private club garages. It had a number etched into the plastic, 4 to 12B. My body went cold. I quickly slid the items back, adjusting the wallet exactly as it had been, and walked away from the counter, trying desperately to regulate my breathing. He emerged from the shower, toweling his hair. "Ready to go, darling," he said, the picture of casual confidence. I managed a shaky smile. "Have a good meeting, sweetie." The number 412B became my obsession. I spent the next 3 days subtly researching new luxury apartment complexes downtown. It was agonizingly slow, a digital needle-in-a-haystack search, but the key fob had a distinctive logo. Finally, late one night, cross-referencing that logo with recent planning permits, I found it. The Crescent Residences. High security, discreet, and located precisely within the unexplained mileage radius. I had the key. I had the address. Now, I needed the time. The opportunity arose the following Friday. Leo announced he would be working from a satellite office out of town for the whole day. It was the perfect window. My hands were steady now, driven not by fear, but by a quiet, fierce necessity. I drove downtown, parked several blocks away, and approached the Crescent. The building was sleek, impersonal, and undeniably expensive. My heart didn't pound. It felt heavy, solid, ready for impact. I walked through the lobby, acting like a resident, and found the elevator bank. My finger pressed a 4. Stepping onto the 4th floor, I found Unit 412B at the end of a quiet corridor. I paused, the key fob cold and slick in my palm. This moment, right here, was the true divorce. It wasn't the signature on the papers. It was the choice to insert the key into that lock. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to go home and pretend I never saw the receipt, never found the fob. But the thought of another year living inside his perfect lie was worse than any truth. I slid the key fob into the reader. There was a soft electronic click. The door was unlocked. I didn't storm in. I pushed the door open just enough to see inside, and the scene that unfolded was precisely the sterile, devastating evidence I had been searching for. It wasn't messy passion. It was a parallel domesticity. A small, intimate life, fully furnished and clearly lived in. On the coffee table lay a financial magazine, the same one Leo always read, and next to it, a silver picture frame. I didn't need to step further inside. I could see the photograph clearly from the doorway. It was a family portrait, taken recently at the beach. Leo was standing there, tanned and smiling, his arm around a woman I didn't know, and standing proudly in front of them, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, was a boy who looked exactly like Leo. A son I never knew existed. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a completely separate life, a second family maintained with the same meticulous care he had once devoted entirely to me. That single silent image was the map, the exit sign, the unchallengeable proof I needed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply backed away from the doorway, ensuring the key fob stayed in my pocket, and turned, walking away from Unit 412B with the quiet determination of a person who has just witnessed their entire world dissolve, but has finally found the ground beneath their feet. The silence of the hallway was louder than any fight could ever be, confirming that the foundation I thought was solid was merely an elaborate stage set. And now, I was finally off stage, ready to build a real life. The wreckage was painful, but the air outside was clean, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. That clarity, born of the deepest betrayal, became my unwavering strength. I remember the exact moment the clarity began to form, not as a flash of lightning, but as the slow, insidious drip of suspicion that started roughly 6 months before the wreckage. Our life, which had always been a perfectly synchronized symphony, began hitting sour notes. It wasn't just that the late-night confessions that defined us dried up. It was the peculiar clinical silence that replaced them, punctuated only by his quick, efficient departures in the morning and his exhausted, almost resentful returns at night. When I asked if everything was all right at work, his answers were too smooth, too practiced. "Just the usual crunch, darling. Big deadlines," he'd say, but his eyes never met mine when he delivered the line. The warmth had vanished, replaced by a kind of brittle efficiency. It was the little things that drove the wedge. The phone became an extension of his body, face down on the nightstand, notifications silenced completely. A behavior he claimed was necessary for focus, but which felt like a shield. If I accidentally brushed against it while reaching for my glasses, he'd snatch it up with a startling speed, a microaggression that shouted guilt louder than any confession. I started noticing scents, not perfume, but a faint, unfamiliar lavender detergent clinging to his collar one Tuesday, when our usual brand was unscented and mild. I convinced myself it was the dry cleaner's mistake. I argued, constantly with my own intuition, labeling it paranoia, a relic of insecurity I thought I'd buried years ago. But the doubt was a stubborn seed, and excuses were merely the water I desperately poured over it, hoping to drown it before it sprouted into a monster. The fear eventually curdled into a cold, focused resolve. I wasn't just losing him. I was losing my sanity trying to reconcile the generous, open man I had married with the elusive ghost inhabiting our home. I knew, rationally, that the only way to survive was to know the truth, whatever the cost. One rainy afternoon, while he was supposedly at an all-day conference, a conference whose location he was unusually vague about, I started looking. I felt physically sick, a violation churning in my stomach. I knew that if I found nothing, I would have to live with the knowledge that I had violated his trust. But if I found something, the violation was already mutual, already catastrophic. I started small, with logistical errors. The mileage on the car didn't match his reported trips. The odometer had logged nearly 150 extra miles that week, miles that couldn't possibly be explained by the routine commute downtown. Then I moved to the joint bank account, logging in with the password he hadn't bothered to change. Nothing major, no lavish gifts, which almost made it worse. Just recurring small charges. A specific coffee shop 30 miles out of town. A small flower. Delivery service I didn't recognize. 2 tickets purchased for a play scheduled for the upcoming Friday that we never discussed. These weren't proof of infidelity in a court of law, but they were certainly undeniable proof of a second parallel life he was running, meticulously funded and hidden. I became a shadow in my own existence, meticulously mapping out his inconsistencies, piecing together the timeline of his deception. I cross-referenced the coffee shop charges with the dates of the play tickets. The play was scheduled for the following Friday. He had already told me he was flying to Chicago for a crucial client pitch that day. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I just smiled, packed his suitcase with an eerie calm, and wished him luck on his flight, noting the micro flicker of surprise in his eyes when I didn't ask any follow-up questions. He must have thought I was willfully blind or blessedly stupid. Friday arrived, a day heavy, with the promise of doom. I told him I had a blinding migraine and would be staying home from work. He left precisely at 8:15 a.m., kissing me goodbye with a manufactured warmth that chilled me to the bone. I waited 2 agonizing hours, long enough for him to get to the airport and then make his way back across town to the location I had tracked. My hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the steering wheel with white knuckles, but my vision was crystal clear. The address I had finally managed to retrieve, a confirmation email I'd found buried deep in his tablet's deleted folder, led me to a quiet, affluent neighborhood on the far side of the city, not 10 minutes from the mysterious coffee shop. The house was new, charming, with brightly manicured flower beds. His car was parked discreetly 2 blocks away, blending in with the neighbors' vehicles. I didn't need to knock. I didn't need to witness them tangled up in an embrace, or hear muffled laughter through a window. All I needed was one undeniable sign, one piece of physical evidence that proved this was not just a rental or a temporary hiding place, but a genuine alternate reality. And there it was, sitting casually on the porch swing, folded neatly, the ridiculous, ugly, hand-knitted blanket I had spent 3 months painstakingly making him for his birthday last year. The one he had claimed had been ruined when he spilled an entire glass of red wine on it at the office. He had lied about the blanket. He had lied about the spill. He had lied about the office. And he was using a tangible piece of my love, my time, my effort to decorate the life he had built with her. The silence of the hallway, the deafening confirmation that dissolved my world, was not a moment of confrontation, but the eerie stillness of standing on that quiet porch, watching my reality dissolve into ash. The foundation I thought was solid was merely an elaborate stage set, and I was finally off stage. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air outside suddenly clean, only because I was outside the poisonous bubble he had constructed. That was the day I found the ground beneath my feet, not by fighting for the past, but by walking away from the lie. What I learned in those agonizing months of self-doubt and clandestine investigation was that betrayal is not a sudden event. It is a meticulously constructed scaffolding of tiny lies designed to support one massive secret, and the only way to tear that structure down is not with rage, but with cold, surgical clarity. If you find yourself constantly rationalizing the inexplicable, if you are working harder to explain away the evidence than the person who should be offering reassurance, remember this: your intuition is usually screaming the truth long before your mind is ready to accept the evidence. Trust that internal alarm. Don't waste your energy watering the seeds of doubt. Pull them out and plant something real instead, because the hardest truth is always kinder than the easiest lie. If this story resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes. Walking away is the strongest step you can take toward building a life that is truly yours. The transition from feeling loved to feeling utterly insane was gradual, a slow erosion of trust disguised as minor fatigue or stress. I kept running the mental calculus. If Alex was telling the truth about working late, why did he flinch every time I walked into the room when he was holding his phone? If he was truly exhausted by the commute, why was his energy always spiky, alternating between overwhelming affection and cold, distant silence? I told myself it was the pressure of his new project, the looming deadline, the financial weight we carried together. I watered those excuses daily until the garden of my self-respect was choked with weeds of denial. The doubt, however, was a relentless whisper. It started with the small things: a jacket smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, too sweet, too floral, not the sharp citrus scent I favored. He attributed it to a client meeting in a crowded restaurant. Then the mileage discrepancy. He said he drove 20 miles round trip to the site. His odometer suggested 35. A careless mistake? Maybe. But lying requires mental effort, and once you realize someone is making that effort, you start looking for where they invested the energy. I started scrutinizing everything, feeling like a caricature of a jealous spouse, yet unable to stop the spiraling anxiety. Was I inventing problems where none existed? Was I sabotaging our happiness simply because I was insecure? The self-doubt was nearly as painful as the suspicion itself. The turning point wasn't dramatic, but sickeningly quiet. It happened one Tuesday night, when he left his work phone on the kitchen counter instead of tucking it into his pocket before his shower. It wasn't the device I was looking for. His personal phone was guarded like the crown jewels, but the work one. Curiosity, that cold, necessary serpent, compelled me. I picked it up, expecting only professional emails. What I found was a bill notification. Not the financial statements I usually handled, but the phone bill detailing data usage and, crucially, call logs. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the screen. The log showed multiple calls, short bursts of conversation, all tagged with the same unfamiliar number. They weren't during business hours. They were at 11:30 p.m., 6:00 a.m., and several times on the Saturday he claimed he was at a mandatory team-building retreat, where phones were supposedly banned. I quickly copied the number, committing it to memory with the dreadful certainty of a death sentence. That number was the first tangible piece of evidence, a microscopic thread I could finally pull. It terrified me, but it also anchored me. I finally had something concrete to investigate, something to silence the voice in my head that insisted I was simply paranoid. The investigation became my shadow job. It consumed my days and haunted my nights. I learned to move silently, to check his browser history after. He'd cleared it, using recovery tools I'd watched YouTube tutorials to master. I became fluent in the language of micro-expressions, watching his eyes dart away when I asked about his lunch plans, noticing the practiced ease with which he shifted topics when I mentioned that Saturday retreat. I felt the awful, crushing weight of knowledge growing inside me, isolating me completely. I couldn't share my fears with anyone, because if I was wrong, I would have ruined my relationship with baseless accusations. If I was right, I needed to protect myself first. I checked our joint credit card statements against the mileage logs. He claimed he ate lunch alone near the construction site. The card showed charges for 2 full meals at a bistro 20 miles in the opposite direction, near the address linked to the strange phone number I'd memorized. The dates matched the late-night calls. The evidence wasn't a confession. It was a map, drawn in receipts and digital fingerprints, leading directly to the location of the betrayal. Each discovery felt like a physical blow, yet strangely empowering. Every lie I uncovered chipped away at the idealized image of the man I loved, preparing me for the inevitable collapse. The tension at home became unbearable. I was living a dual life, the cheerful, supportive partner during the day, and the meticulous, heartbroken detective by night. I stopped sleeping. Every small sound, every notification chime, sent a jolt of panic through me. Alex, sensing the change, became increasingly solicitous, buying flowers, suggesting date nights. These gestures, meant to soothe, felt like insults now. Bribes offered to keep the lid on the truth. His attempts at reconciliation only solidified my resolve. He wasn't trying to fix our relationship. He was trying to fix me, to stop me from asking too many questions. One evening, I found the final, undeniable peace. He had taken his car to the mechanic for an oil change and forgotten to clear the recent destinations from the integrated GPS system. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine cold, scrolling through the saved locations. There was home, work, and one entry labeled simply, E's Place. The initial of the woman linked to the phone number. I typed the address into my own phone. It was the same address as the one linked to the bistro charges and the mysterious phone number. It wasn't a hotel or a client site or a restaurant. It was a residential street, a small, neat house with a porch swing, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac. I drove there, not needing to confront him yet, just needing to see the physical reality of the ghost that had been haunting our relationship. I parked 3 blocks away, blending my car into the row of suburban anonymity, my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for flight. I waited. The streetlights flickered on, painting the neighborhood in sickly yellow hues. And then, I saw him, not alone, not stressed, not tired from work. He was laughing, leaning against the porch railing, his arm casually draped around the shoulder of a woman whose face was obscured by the twilight, but whose silhouette screamed intimacy. She was petite, vibrant, and her hand rested gently on his chest, right over his heart, the place I thought I still occupied. In that instant, the investigation ceased. There was no more doubt, only cold, hard clarity. The emotional exhaustion of the past weeks, the sleepless nights, the self-interrogation, the fear that I was simply crazy, vanished, replaced by a singular, paralyzing shock. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just watched, a silent witness to the complete demolition of my future. The easy lies he told me suddenly made perfect sense. They were protective walls around the truth he cherished more than me. I watched them share a moment of tender domestic familiarity, a familiarity he had systematically denied me for months. And in that terrifying silence, I knew exactly what I had to do. The time for whispering was over. The time for decisive action had arrived. I drove home, not to confront him, but to gather the scattered pieces of myself and prepare for war. The familiar scent of our home, a blend of fresh linen and his expensive cologne, felt like a mockery, a carefully constructed stage set for a play that had just been canceled. I didn't cry. Tears felt useless, a luxury afforded only to the defeated. I moved through the house with a surgical precision, guided by an icy clarity I hadn't known I possessed. This wasn't grief. This was survival. This was the meticulous dismantling of 6 years of shared history. I started with the financials, changing every joint password, transferring half of the liquid savings, the half legally mine, ethically owed, into a new, separate account that he would never find. I gathered every document, the deed to the house, the titles to the cars, investment portfolios, life insurance policies where I was still listed as the primary beneficiary. Each piece of paper was a nail being hammered into the coffin of our marriage. I packed a small, practical suitcase, necessities, work clothes, and the stack of evidence I'd secured from his burner phone earlier that day. The photos, the sickeningly intimate texts, the confirmation of the apartment rental. By 3 a.m., the war room was ready, and I was scheduled to meet the best divorce attorney in the city at 9 sharp, before the lying mask had even stretched across his face for the day. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Eleanor, looked at the file I presented and didn't offer pity, only professional respect. "You came prepared, Sarah," she stated, her tone approving. "Most women come here looking for vengeance. You came looking for freedom. We proceed immediately with the separation papers and a temporary restraining order on the joint assets. He will be served tomorrow afternoon." The speed was breathtaking, a testament to my foresight and his arrogance. He had been so convinced of his ability to deceive that he never considered the possibility of my preparation. I returned home that evening, not to stay, but to wait. I sat on the living room sofa, the packed suitcase by the door, the legal binder on the coffee table. The house was silent, heavier than usual, weighted by the inevitable collision. When his key finally turned the lock at 8:47 p.m., precisely 47 minutes later than his usual late night at the office, the air crackled. He walked in, loosened his tie, and offered a practiced, tired smile. "Rough day, honey. I'm exhausted," he began, already heading for the kitchen. "Sit down, Mark," I instructed, my voice flat, devoid of warmth or accusation. It was the voice of a judge delivering a life sentence. He paused, sensing the shift, the absence of my usual comforting presence. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as they registered the suitcase by the door. His smile evaporated. "What is this, Sarah? Where are you going?" I didn't rise. I simply pushed the binder across the coffee table until it stopped inches from his knee. "I'm not going anywhere, Mark." "You are." He looked at the papers, confusion warring with dawning panic. He opened the binder, his breath hitching as he saw the letterhead, "Dissolution of marriage." "What? What is this? Are you serious? We had a fight. I know I've been busy, but—" "Don't lie to me again," I cut him off, finally allowing a sliver of the steel I felt to penetrate my voice. "The lies end now. I know about the apartment. I know about her. I know about everything you denied me while you were building a whole second life." I watched the color drain from his face, the realization hitting him that the protective walls he built were worthless. He didn't deny it. He defaulted to narcissistic self-pity. "Sarah, please. It was a mistake. She means nothing. I was stressed. We can fix this." "No," I stated clearly, shaking my head. "We can't. Because I didn't come to you asking for answers. I came to you with solutions. The papers are served. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, per the temporary court order, which cites marital assets and emotional distress. All evidence is attached. Your attorney will be contacted by mine tomorrow morning." I stood up then, finally looking down at him. He looked small, pathetic, stripped bare of his comfortable deception. "I loved you, Mark. But I love myself more. And I refuse to be the fool who stays while you pretend to apologize." I didn't wait for his response. I walked past him, picked up my suitcase, and walked out the door, locking it behind me. I drove away, not toward a new apartment, but toward a hotel downtown, where peace and silence awaited. I left him standing in the cold, empty wreckage of the life he chose to destroy. The divorce was messy, as Eleanor predicted, but swift. Because I had the evidence, the financial preparation, and the unwavering resolve, Mark quickly lost leverage. He tried to fight, threatened to ruin me, but my lawyer simply presented the mountain of proof of his calculated infidelity and the misuse of marital funds. He settled, forced to accept the terms I dictated, which included selling the house and dividing the assets cleanly. Months passed, turning into a year. The bitterness eventually faded, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of gratitude, not for the trauma, but for the strength it forced me to uncover. I used my half of the settlement to move to a new city, start a job I genuinely loved, and buy a small apartment with huge windows that filled the space with light. There was no shared history there, only future, possibility. I realized that the biggest danger in my marriage wasn't Mark's betrayal. It was my own willingness to ignore the quiet, persistent whispers of my intuition. Those small, nagging feelings that something was wrong. The ones I had politely silenced to maintain the illusion of a perfect life. They were the true alarms. Trusting that internal compass, that quiet voice that knew the truth long before my eyes saw it, became my greatest lesson. It's tempting to think that finding the one guarantees happiness, but the real journey is finding yourself. If you are currently navigating a storm, or perhaps just feeling that tiny internal rumble that something in your life isn't right, please don't silence it. Listen closely. That tiny voice might be the only true friend you have in the silence. It might be saving you from the biggest mistake of your life. If this story resonated with you, if you've had to trust that small, defiant voice to pull you out of the darkness, hit the like button and share your experience in the comments. We are stronger when we realize we are not alone in our battles.